הכל זמם. את לכו חפץ תחת השמיים. את ללדת ואת למות. את לטעת ואת לקור נטוע. את להרוג ואת לרפוא. את לפרוץ ואת לבנות. את לבכות ואת לשחוק. את צפות ואת ריקות. The words of Kohelet, there's a time, a season set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. There's a time for being born, and there comes a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, a time for hurting and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping, time for laughing, time for wailing, and a time for dancing. Time for throwing stones, and a time for gathering stones up. Time for embracing, and a time for refraining. A time for seeking, and a time for losing. A time for keeping, and a time for letting go. A time for ripping, and a time for sewing, a time for silence, and a time for speaking. Ribbons on the garments of Carol's beloved family have been torn. This has been a time for tearing, and it is a time for wailing. And it's also a time for smiling and a time for speaking. We are gathered here to honor the memory and the life of Carol Amster, beloved wife of 54 years of Herb, Zichrono Livracha, adored sister of Andy Putterman, cherished mother of Aaron, Barry, and Lisa, and through marriage of Susan, Jay, and Doug, loving grandmother of Lauren, Joshua, Michael, Zachary, Adam, and Allison, and through marriage to Angus and Jenna, and through love to Tomer and Sivan. Carol's Hebrew name is Yedida, friend. And so I extend my condolences to all. It defined her. The loss is felt by all of us. For when you were a friend of Carol's, it was like feeling like being family. Carol was born on the 14th of Adar, actually in Adar number 1, the extra Adar added for a leap year, lunar leap year. Today is the 14th of Adar. It is also the special first Adar because we are now in the lunar leap year, which only occurs every several years. And I take that as a sign to celebrate her life. We begin with that, with first words from Ali, and then from Lisa, then from Lauren, and I'll speak on behalf of the community. We begin with Ali.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I just asked.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know the hundreds of screens.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today to celebrate the life of my grandmother, whom we fondly call our Maga, a term that my oldest cousin Lauren coined far before you know who showed up. I'm Allie, Carol's youngest grandchild, and I'm here today to give you a brief history of my Maga's incredible life. On February 14th in 1935, nearly 87 years ago today, my Maga was born in the Bronx to Bertie and Louis Putterman. A few years later, my Maga's sister Andy was born, and their family moved to Brooklyn, where Maga met her future husband, my Papa Herb, when they shared a history book in the 4th grade. Then at 14, Maga and her family moved across the street from my Papa's family in Manhattan Beach. It wasn't long before they started dating. They were still a couple when Maga went to Brooklyn College and Papa to MIT. On September 9th, 1956, they got married and began their adult lives together. Well, kind of. The first few years of their marriage, they lived in a duplex home with my Papa's parents. Not necessarily how I expect to spend my newlywed years with my future husband. Apparently, the close proximity to Papa's parents didn't cramp their romantic interest in each other, since my Uncle Aaron was born on their first anniversary and their second son, Barry, was born only 20 months later. With this growing family, my Maga and Papa decided that they were ready to leave Manhattan Beach and were eager for their future together, wherever it took them. They first moved to Natick, Massachusetts, where my Papa took a job at Raytheon. After just a year, Raytheon asked my Papa to relocate to Lewiston, Maine. I've been told that Maga was not enthusiastic about moving to a small town in Maine that had next to nothing in common with New York City. Much to their surprise, Maga and Papa liked being part of a small town community, but missed the arts and culture that they had both enjoyed growing up. After a year, my Papa got a job at Ford Motor Company, which meant another move, this time to Michigan. My Maga was intent on finding a place for their family that not only had the same small town community that they loved in Lewiston, but that also offered a bustling cultural life as well. That's when they found Ann Arbor. In 1964, Maga, Papa, Aaron, and Barry moved here and instantly fell in love with the community. It was during this time in Ann Arbor that they had their third child and only daughter, my mom, Lisa. 4 years later, my Papa took a new job as an executive at Jacobson's, which meant that the family had to move to Jackson, Michigan. I'd be lying if I said my Maga was excited about living in a town with only 60 Jewish families. But of course, not only did she make it work, she began to thrive there. It was in Jackson that my Maga really expanded her involvement in the community. She taught a women's rights class, involved herself with the local temple sisterhood, joined a bowling team, played golf, took ballet classes, and was very active in the small Jewish community. When Aaron was a junior at the University of Michigan and Barry was about to head off to his freshman year at Arizona State, my Maga, Papa, and Mom moved back to Ann Arbor just in time for my mom to start 6th grade. In their iconic house on Heather Way, they started to create their lasting legacy in Ann Arbor. During this time, Maga became involved in the Jewish community of Ann Arbor, the arts, and local philanthropy. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the important role of my Papa in my Maga's story. He was her life partner, and he helped her to be her best self, encouraging her to be involved in her interests and make an impact on the community. In August of '87, Aaron and Sue had a baby girl, my cousin Lauren, and Maga's heart grew 100 sizes. Then came Michael, Zachary, and Josh not long after, and eventually my brother and I were born, making Maga the grandmother to 6. Around this time, my Maga and Papa recognized the insanity that is Michigan winters, and they started spending the coldest months out in Orange County, close to their grandchildren and sons. A smart decision, in my opinion. Over the last 50 years, my grandparents built a wonderful and full life in this community. When my Papa died, we discussed Maga moving to Philadelphia to be closer to my family. But she refused because she didn't want to leave her friends and life behind here. She loved this town with all of her heart, and we are glad to be able to celebrate her in such a special place. I was looking forward to someday coming to the University of Michigan for graduate school. It won't be the same without her here, but hopefully I can continue the Ann Arbor Amster legacy in her honor. Masks make your nose run. Thank you for being here today to honor Mom. As Ali said, and as you all know, she loved this community, and we know you loved her too. Thank you also for caring for her. This has been a shocking week for all of us. We have certainly taken comfort in being together as a family, in speaking with the rabbi, in looking through photos, hearing from many of you and telling stories. We have cried and we have laughed, recognizing how feisty she could be, how stubborn she could be, and how much she could talk. She could really talk. But we all recognize how lucky we have been to have her in our lives and learn from her in so many different ways. She was wise. The source of her wisdom was her deep and ongoing engagement with life, with the world, with her community, with CNN, especially with CNN. She particularly valued her connection with people and was a resource for others in good times and bad. She had a wealth of experience to share and generously did so. I know that every one of these relationships was a reciprocal one, helping her to continue to learn and evolve. There was no stronger or more enduring relationship than the one my parents shared. She learned from him and he from her. My dad's quiet thoughtfulness and her tenacious drive balanced each other perfectly. Mom was never known to just sit quietly by and not share her honest thoughts and beliefs. She focused her conviction and energy on all different aspects of her life. She and Dad appreciated how lucky they were and were committed to helping others who were less fortunate. Their philanthropic efforts were evident in the Jewish community and well beyond. It wasn't just about money. Mom was a doer, not satisfied to be on the sidelines. When passionate about something, Mom dove in. In the early 70s, she taught a women's rights class at Jackson Community College. She became an expert on this issue, and it permeated her life. For me, that meant for my 8th birthday, I received an electric car set instead of the Barbie dolls that I wanted. She modeled strength and independence at a time when this was just beginning to be acceptable. Her mantra to me growing up was that I should have the same opportunities in life as my brothers. I attribute much of my professional drive and success to this lifelong lesson. And apparently my brothers also got the message, as their wives, Sue and Jay, are also strong, independent women with successful careers. When it came to her grandchildren, she had high expectations, but she didn't want them to squeeze into a mold. Instead, she nurtured and inspired them to pursue their dreams and passions. She wanted their lives to be fulfilling and meaningful to them. And she took immense pleasure in watching them grow personally and professionally. They made her so proud. Their athletic accomplishments, their musical talents, their academic achievements. But most of all, she loved who they have each become. Luckily, she was with all of her grandchildren in August at Lauren and Gus's wedding. Over and over again, she told us how happy she was. It's no coincidence that she aspired to live her life with a similar conviction to what she instilled in her grandchildren. She involved herself in things that were joyful and fulfilling to her, and Ann Arbor offered so many opportunities to experience all that excited her. She loved the University Musical Society events, the Ann Arbor Symphony, student and community theater productions. She loved the U of M sports events, particularly when they were winning, and which isn't so often, and loved that she could host all generations here for football games. She loved walking on the beach in Newport with Barry. She loved visiting Maine and simply watching the tide go in and out. She was lucky enough to spend time there last summer with my cousin Andrew, his wife Ruti, and their children, who she loved dearly. She really had a unique ability to stop and smell the roses. I remember a conversation I had with my mom a few years ago. To not worry her, I chose not to tell her about a challenge one of my kids was facing. As I should have known with my mom, that proved futile. She sensed something was wrong and confronted me.
She told me that my efforts to protect her made her feel irrelevant and that she could help. And she was right. And she did. This is the story of how she lived her life. She faced things head on with open arms and a big heart. She loved this community. She loved her family. She considered herself blessed. She lived a long, happy, and meaningful life.
For those who don't know me, my name is Lauren. I'm Aaron's daughter and Maga Carol and Papa Herb's oldest grandchild. I'm also the only grandchild who has actually attended the University of Michigan, so far at least. And for 2 years, while I got my MBA from Ross, I had the privilege of living 5 minutes away from Maga. Although she claims we only breathed the same air, that was not my memory. We would have dinners around Ann Arbor, go to shows at the Power Center, spend holidays together, and even shop at Costco together so we could split things like bulk toilet paper 50-50. If I had to choose one word to describe Maga, I would pick passionate. She loved hard. She loved the arts, musicals, dance, concerts. But to be honest, I think the performance she loved the most was her own. You could always hear Maga projecting above the rest during a Passover Dayenu or a happy birthday song. She loved nature. From Maine to Newport Beach to her own neighborhood, Maga always had an appreciation for natural beauty. I'll never forget walks on the beach in California with her and Papa collecting sea glass and exploring the tide pools. But most of all, she loved her family and especially her grandchildren. Despite growing up across the country from her, I vividly remember her and Papa being very present throughout my childhood. She used to tell me, I'm not a normal grandma, I'm a cool grandma. And though it sounds a bit cliche, she really was. She was sort of a hippie grandma, free-spirited, open-minded, and somewhat alternative. I remember when she would come to visit, she would always bring gifts, but the gifts always had a special meaning, like a craft that benefited a refugee community in Israel or a piece of jewelry from a woman-owned business here in Ann Arbor. One time when Josh and I were a bit older, we were in Ann Arbor, and after a night of partying, we broke into the big house with some friends. When we returned to Maga's house at 3 a.m., she was waiting up for us and understandably worried and asked where we were. We told her the truth that we had broken into the big house, to which she responded, okay, I'm not mad anymore, I'm proud. I think I speak for all the grandchildren when I say that she was our biggest cheerleader. It was so clear how proud she was of each of our endeavors, whether it was Teach for America, touring Europe with a band, or becoming an Instagram cake phenomenon. There was nothing more rewarding than sharing something with Maga and hearing her respond with the classic, how fabulous. She was a cool grandma, but she really thought we were the coolest grandchildren. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that part of what made Maga passionate was also that she fought hard. She was stubborn, opinionated, impatient, and a bit feisty. Passwords were the bane of her existence, as proven by her Wi-Fi password at home. I hate this 35. At every single Jewish holiday, she would proclaim that we better enjoy it because this would be the last time she would ever cook a holiday meal. But of course, it never was. And I'll never forget when she got in an explosive fight with our Israeli tour guide at Mount Herzl over whether a plant was a bay leaf or basil. To be fair, Maga was right on this side, on this one. But despite some of these, you can say flaws, it was this passion that made Maga so admirable in my eyes. She was bold, confident, and authentically her. While this past week has been enormously difficult, I feel grateful that I got 34 years of Maga Carroll. And I know that her passion, both the love and the fight, will live on through every one of us. She has taught us how to live life to the fullest, pursue our passions, and always fight for what we know is right. After Papa Herb died, Maga and I shared a belief that he has been with us during the most important life moments in the form of a butterfly. Maga, I love you, miss you, and will be looking for pairs of butterflies for the rest of my life.
I hope you'll forgive me if I repeat a detail or two. We have a tradition that the soul passes through the words the Torah is rolled to as she passes from this world to the next. Carol's neshama passed from this world to the next on Shabbat morning of the Parsha of Tetzaveh, as the scroll was rolled to the words of Exodus that describe the joyful instructions for exactly how to prepare and construct and design the house of God, and how it is to be brought to life through everyone's participation in its construction and beautification. The words are a creative soul's dream, designs of hammered gold and hammered copper, embroideries of pomegranates all around, specific dimensions and details of the stones, breastplate, the diadems on the high priest, the woven fabrics and special vestments, to the very walls of the tabernacle, made of fabrics and leathers hanging from poles open to the sky above. Make me a house so I may dwell among them, God commands, but it's no ordinary house. The walls are not made of stone and brick, but of fabrics, hammered work, artistic designs. It is a house like an art gallery you actually live in. Every moment of walking through, an invitation to stop suddenly and be in the moment of connecting with the transcendent through its beauty, natural and created, and through its connection to others sharing that space. I'm asking you to think for a moment of Carol's house. Less of a house than a gallery. Every place, special, every place a spot to connect with something of beauty, something immediate. Special attention in the parsha is given to the priesthood and the Levites, for these folks will serve the community as the ones who serve especially those who are hungry, poor, suffering losses, sick, and needing special services. I think of the Amster Center at JFS, the Ann Arbor Community Foundation, the Amster Fund for Lupus Research. And these Levites are also serving God and carrying forth the teachings, the Torah, and mission of Judaism. I think of the institutions of the Hebrew Day School. I think of the building that we are in today, Beth Israel Congregation. And some are the future musicians of the temple who will set the entire process of community to music. I think of the Musical Society. They bring the people together through ritual and celebration and serve the community by taking care of those who have material and spiritual needs. Each person is made to feel special and loved. And the descriptions of this house of God, of this Mishkan, focus on two particular dimensions. First, the work of creating the house of God is a creative communal enterprise not of individual successes, but it requires joyfully doing it together. I think of her work at Federation and in all of the many innumerable committees she took part in. It requires teamwork of all the men and women working together, engaging creatively together. God dwells among us when we are working together, and by implication, not dwelling among us when we are not working together as a team. I think also of Carol's Havurah, as well as all of those committees, her decades of bringing people together so we could build it all together. And the second dimension the Torah emphasizes in these words is that the construction requires chokhmah, wisdom. For without the wisdom of doing it in exactly the right way, its purposes will not endure. I think of Carol's wisdom, her very clear advice to do things her way, I mean the right way, never shy in being expressed. Each of those dimensions I hope you feel, and the lessons shining from the parchment of the Torah shine through Carol's life. From the time Carol and Herb shared that book in fourth grade, they made their own history and ours. Marrying it when Carol was 21, their first anniversary present, Aaron, followed by Barry. And rather than continue in the family milliner business in New York, they struck out on their own, as we heard. And during the year together in Lewiston, Maine, they discovered their love of living in a small town, what we have here in Ann Arbor, of feeling close to each other, knowing each other, where nature was palpable and present, but also yearning for the culture of New York City. When they moved to Dearborn in 1964, they discovered Ann Arbor. Lisa was born, and in 1967, they moved to Jackson. Herb, the president of the synagogue. Carol teaching women's lib feminism at the Jackson Community College, and the Great Book Series, and the Bowling Group, and Weight Watchers, and making the town bloom. She brought the Alvin Ailey Dance Company to Jackson. They went to Vienna to greet Soviet Jews, refuseniks, fleeing oppression. And in 1976, they were invited on the Special Federation Leadership Mission to Israel, even though there was no federation in Jackson. That's how much they were leaders, builders, and creators. With Aaron at U of M and Barry at State, Lisa in sixth grade, they moved to the house in Ann Arbor Hills in 1978, and loving this community. It fulfilled Carol's dream of a small town full of nature, but also having the culture of New York. She'd say, in Ann Arbor, you can go see Leonard Bernstein and then have dinner with him too. This is a place, she would say, where you can be a big fish in a small pond, and you can accomplish so much. And so she did. She was the first executive director of the Jewish Federation of Ann Arbor. She was active in her Havurah, meeting regularly for Shabbat and forging lifelong friendships that are not replaceable, but leave a legacy of fabulous memories. Carol and Herb were always doing something. They passionately and generously helped build and sustain cultural institutions and charitable causes throughout this community. Jewish Community Center, the Jewish Federation, Jewish Family Services, Hebrew Day School, University of Michigan Hillel, Beth Israel Congregation. They made it their life's work to build a strong local Jewish community, turning big visions into reality. The reality we are privileged to live in today, the Mishkan that we now inhabit. Carol was actively involved as a volunteer and as a professional. She helped build up U of M Hillel, maybe the best in the nation. Michael, she still refers to as, the family still refers to as Rabbi Brooks, which I think is well-deserved. She directed the United Jewish Appeal, served on the Ann Arbor Holocaust Memorial Committee to bring that beautiful and important sculpture to this town, and was the Jewish community's first professional federation director when UJA merged with the Jewish Community Council in 1986. She served on and chaired Federation's Allocations Committee for many years, active very recently with the wisdom of how to distribute funds from the COVID emergency fund allocations. And after Herb's death in 2010, Carol helped launch the Herb Amster Center at Jewish Family Services of Washtenaw County, This visionary initiative has enabled JFS to offer their expertise to those who can pay in order to continue serving those in the community who cannot, exactly like the temple in the Torah. As Herb said, do good things, but remember the bottom line so you can do more good things. Carol's lifetime of achievement and involvement was not limited to the Jewish community. She devoted time, money, and resources to key organizations in Ann Arbor, serving on many boards, including the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, University Musical Society, playing that music to the life we live, the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra, and the News Center. She and Herb established the Herbert and Carol Amster Lupus Research Fund at the University of Michigan. In addition to receiving the Federation's Humanitarian Award with Herb, Carol received the Celebration of Women's Volunteer Award. And for those of us who receive the Federation Appeal every year to continue helping Jewish Ann Arbor to thrive, as we would sit there opening the envelope and considering what level of donation to find in our hearts and our capabilities to give, you always knew there at the top leading the way would be Carol and Herb's names, and in recent years, Carol's. But Carol's work in the community never detracted from her pride and joy, her grandchildren. His grandchildren were born in California. Carol and Herb took a timeshare there. Now, not only always doing things in Ann Arbor, because they were always doing things, but now doing things with them, going to games, talking, cherishing every detail of their company and their lives. As they told me, many of their own peers would say how Carol knew more about their peers' lives than their own grandparents, because Carol loved every detail. Her grandchildren were like a gallery of her life. Each detail, each new perspective, each inspiration, endlessly fascinating to her. And she was their biggest admirer and supporter. Not that Carol couldn't be direct. As one person remarked upon meeting Carol, I think I've just met my first New Yorker. There was no opinion she didn't share. She said what she thought. She was a true feminist. Women were not to be silent. They should say what they think, they should learn, they should talk about and be involved with the world's problems, the world's work, and they should be assertive. She was very bothered by the world's problems and very concerned about making society a more humane, just place, the purposes of our tabernacle. So while assertive in her opinions, because these things are important, she was also very open-minded and accepting in a positive exchange of ideas. As she once said, I had opinions of people with tattoos until my grandson had a tattoo, and he's the same wonderful person he was yesterday. For Carol, it was a calling to be inclusive, and it was a necessity to be relevant. In but one example, she learned Instagram so she could be involved in her granddaughter's cake business, and her Instagram comments are hilarious. She'd figure out anything, learn anything to be supportive of you. Carol loved beauty, creativity, music, the arts, and nature. During their year in Maine, Carol led in putting on a production of The King and I, which, by the way, I put it on last night to show my kids and listen to the songs in honor of her. It was very interesting listening to the words and thinking of Carol. Very inclusive. She loved to see everyone being creative, and she was creative herself, inheriting the gifts of her immigrant mother, who sketched and designed brilliantly. Carol had an amazing eye for the intersection of nature, beauty, and the transcendent. As we heard, she'd walk along the beach and pick up the glass. At any moment, sea glass, at any moment, she might, and this is what I heard from the family, deeply touched me. At any moment, she might suddenly grab your hand on the beach, out in nature, by a piece of art, listening to music, and say, stop. Pay attention to this. This youthful, self-aware, surroundings-aware spirit, always connected to the beauty, to the transcendent, and to you. Her grandchildren, searching for the right words, as we heard, would say that it was a side of her that they called her hippie grandma, hippie MAGA. Life is too short not to stop and connect to the creative spirit, to beauty, to truly living in the moment. But that elevation is not meant for a few, it is meant for all. Mirroring the Torah's exhortation that God's Spirit only resides when the people are working together to build God's house. Carol was the paragon of building Jewish community through joyful and wise teamwork. If it's not built with wisdom, if it's not built in the right way, if it's not built through friendship and activity, it will not stand. Her views were wise, always expressed with great specificity, as are the words in Exodus. And she was always active, always on the go, inhabited by a spirit of impatience to build, to do, and to create. We live in the institutions, in the house that Carol built, not a house of stone and brick, but a house of friendship, a house of purpose, a house of inclusion, a house of service, a house of love, of beauty, and of God. May we honor her memory by continuing in that example. I close with the words of her grandson, Adam. My grandmother was incredibly self-aware, a person of deep feeling and always astute. She had conviction in taking direction. And I feel like I know how to live better because of her. And I'm going to. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai ro'i lo echsar binot desha yarbitzeni. Amei menuchot inahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yanchini b'maglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech v'geit samavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishantecha hima inachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged zorarai di shanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivaya. Achtov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yimei chayai. Shalti beveit Adonai la'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God helps me to lie down in the green pastures and leads me beside the waters. God restores my soul, guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my foes. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Adonai forever. We arrive at El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. I'm going to ask us to do a practice, all of us, for a moment, traditional custom that is sometimes done right before this prayer. The God full of compassion, may this beautiful neshama rise to her other home in you, is in ascension a serenade of that soul. To help with that process, with that freeing, I'm asking us all to take a moment, 2 moments of silence. And for the first one, please practice this. If there's any place where you feel that you fell short with regard to Carol, you weren't exactly the friend she needed, you didn't call enough, your temperament and hers didn't gel in the right way, forgive yourself and apologize to her for that shortcoming and let her forgive you for it. And if there's any place where Carol fell short with you because of the nature of her personality or temperament, or we can't be in two places at once, we can't be everything to everyone, that she fell short in some way to love you and be with you, will you listen for the voice of Carol's soul to acknowledge that and apologize to you? And to the extent that you are able, will you grant her soul and her forgiveness? Please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochem B'Hameromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'Ma'alot Kedoshim, U'Tehorim, Kezohar Harakia, Mahazirim, L'nishmat Yedida, Shahachal Olamaha, Began Eden Tehe Menuchata, Anha Baal Harachamim, Hastireha Beseter Kenafecha Olamim, Utzror Bitzror HaChayim, Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachlata, V'tanuach B'Shalom, Al Mishkavaha, V'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Carol Amster, who is going and returning to her other home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. And may her soul be forever bound up in the bond of the souls living in the other world, the next world, and the souls precious to her living in this world. And may she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service at Arborcrest is going to be private for immediate family only. If I could ask the pallbearers to please step forward at this time.
As the interment is for family only, immediate family only, those who would like to remain here for Shiva when the family will return immediately from Arborcrest are welcome to do so. The Shiva will begin when they return, which should be approximately noon, and we will also be streaming online and in Zoom. So everyone is invited to join. And people who are Zooming at that time are also invited to share their loving memories and tributes at that time. Shiva will continue when they return.